Welcome to the Schoolroom podcast. We are in Reshaping Collections in the Chinese Canadian Museum, and we're so happy to welcome Howie Tsui. He's one of the artists, one of six artists which we commissioned to do new work for the Reshaping Collections exhibition. Welcome, Howie.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, these are my works, an elegy of dust, earth, some new potted sculptures, I call them, for the exhibition.
So, why don't we just start from the beginning? Tell us what was your process when you came and worked at the Chung Collection and went through the archives and then came up with this work.
Okay, well, I think from the get-go, given the scale of the Chung collection, I was already in my head thinking about what items to request to have a look at. And I think a project I was working on previously was looking at this idea of potted landscapes or penjing. I was thinking about throwing them in aquariums, but that's really complex.
So, just if you could explain more about penjing landscapes, what are they, where they come from?
Penjing or pungeng is, I guess in the family, I guess people know it as like bonsai or punzoi, kind of miniaturized landscapes, and they're very kind of common in, I guess, Chinese literati culture, where a scholar, an artist, a calligrapher would have a small potted rock in the studio, and it's often kind of an object of contemplation, of teleportation and kind of transportation into, I guess, nature. So you can maybe be calm and then, with your thoughts.
Right. So, bonsai is Japanese, and then punjing or penjing is Chinese.
Yep.
And that makes sense now that you say the Cantonese word to me, punjing, because pun must mean pot,
Yep.
and then ging is landscape.
Yes.
So it's like landscape in a pot in
Yes.
a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Pungeng. And then I didn't even know bonsai is punzoi, which I heard it growing up all the time
Right.
in Cantonese in my house, but I never put the two and together because bonsai, the word, is the same, I guess, word that I grew up with. So yeah, so there was the kind of, so I started requesting landscapes from Magic Lantern projector slides of the Rocky Mountains, because I found there's this parallel between some of the landscape in kind of southeastern China and Hong Kong, the mountainous archipelago type of forms, as well as in the Rockies, also these dramatic valleys and peaks. So when I went to the collection, I saw these slides of the Rocky Mountains. There's a penjing book that was in the collection I took a look at. So in a way, I kind of like generally structured it on research around this idea of the potted landscape. But then I also moved on to more like these kind of topics around, I guess it's quite a very common kind of a loaded image of the railroad spike, because that story is so prominent for the railroad laborers.
Right. And when you think about the railroad in the context of Chinese Canadian laborers, you immediately think about it differently from when you think about just in general the railroad in Canadian history.
I do. And I think my relationship to the, Chinese Canadian railroad building story kind of started in university like 20 so years ago. But it never really interpreted in any other way outside of this being a historical fact. However, I think through this research process I was conducting for another project around this practice of bone repatriation, which is the practice of, returning one's bones back to the province of Guangdong province. If that whole system that was organized and run by the Chinese Benevolent Association that occurred, I think I started feeling this parallel around the material, corporal body of the bones of the laborers wanting to return home as part of a traditional custom, and that trying to relate to that with my personal longing to maybe return home to Hong Kong, where I was born.
Oh, that's super interesting. I didn't make that connection earlier when I was looking at your work, that in a way, it related back to your contemporary identity. So I like that connection. Can you maybe talk more in detail about the work that we see in front of you?
Yes. So I guess there's some more detail. Like first, formally, like when I was building these, I had to hunt actually for large pots that I found here in Vancouver. These stones were generously donated to me from a gallery I work with in Hong Kong called Hanart TZ. And it seems kind of crazy to be shipping rocks across the Pacific Ocean, but I found when I was looking for them locally, I couldn't find rocks with a similar characteristic. Characteristic in that they have these beautiful, like natural characteristics of like wrinkles and like crevices and cracks. The only ones I could find was at like an aquarium store, but they were kind of like red earthen color called dragon stones. So these ones were shipped across the ocean, and I use these as the kind of compositional anchor for these scapes. And then the ceramic work is sort of a new kind of experiment in my practice. I've been interested in exploring the material of clay and ceramics. So I worked with a technician from Emily Carr that helped me produce these. And it's weird because I was trying to recreate a very almost like realistic looking bone. So what we did was we had these like plastic anatomical bones that we made a mold of, and then I pressed clay into those. But instead of just the clay pieces, I wanted to integrate these railroad spike forms into them. So they look also like as if they were actual metal, like driven into the ceramic.
They really look metal, but
Yeah.
they're not.
They're ceramic.
They're ceramic. And what's that you're holding in your hand?
This is, I guess it's called a suona, or in Cantonese we call it a di da. But there was one of these in the collection that I gravitated to.
In the Chung collection.
In the Chung collection, and formally I was very attracted to it. But then through the research, I found out that it's a common instrument played in Chinese funerary practices.
Okay.
It has like a very kind of shrieking, sharp, pointy kind of noise.
Almost like a lament.
It is a lament. Yeah. So I integrated parts of this object into the bones. You can see it here, made a mold of it. There's also, little markings that are indentations of like what mahjong tiles markings look like. And that's also a reference to these mahjong sets that I saw in the Chung collection. And I started thinking about how, the game of mahjong serves as also like a way of escape. Like I think the railroad laborers would use other games of chance as a way of pastime, like a hard day labor, but at night it was a way of, not thinking about the labor and just kind of, it's like a work and play balance. So I think I have some also personal relationships with Hong Kong. I think growing up and moving to Thunder Bay, which is quite isolated, I think our family played a lot of mahjong to almost teleport us back to Hong Kong just through a game. So
yeah, I mean, even just the clatter of the tiles brings me back to Hong Kong. It's like a very specific noise that you hear the mahjong tiles getting ready to go.
Yeah, even when before I moved to Vancouver, I moved in 2012, but when I came here in 2010 for an exhibition, I heard mahjong tiles clacking in Chinatown here, and it made me feel like some sort of comfort.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And the landscape, it's really true that these rocks they really bring you back to the landscapes of China. When you look at those landscapes that are ink painting and ink rocks, in the Chinese ink painters, these are the rocks that you see that are in those Chinese landscapes. And they kind of really bring that sense of identity here to Canada.
Yeah, I wanted to, I guess, maybe draw parallels between both landscapes on both sides of the Pacific. As well, I think in my practice in general, I'm very interested in world building. So even in my paintings and my media work, I tend to be interested in building and creating this puzzle of a world first before it's inhabited by maybe figures, or in this case, these kind of symbolic hybrid objects.
And just tell us a little bit more about your practice, because from what I understand, you rarely do sculpture.
Yes, I rarely do sculpture. I have some sculptures. I have like a kinetic sound sculpture. I've done some sculpture in the past. I think sometimes it's like a practical thing.
Right.
I think in Vancouver, space is expensive.
Right.
So, if you make sculpture, you're gonna probably have to figure out where to put it afterwards if you have to store it.
And
So,
this work, like all the works in the exhibition, were a commission. And as you know, because I'm the curator, I
Mhm.
kind of just let you do whatever you wanted. So there were kind of no parameters.
Yes.
Did that kind of help you move you towards doing something kind of totally that you didn't normally do? Or
It did. I think the structure of this commission helped me feel like looser and experimental and exploring something I probably couldn't spend the time or the material resources, financial resources to explore without something at the end, like it having to go into a collection or something that's more easy to be acquired.
Right.
So I think I was waiting for an opportunity like the one presented by the museum here to explore, I guess, ceramics, which has kind of been something on my bucket list.
And what's really interesting about this sculptural work is when I first saw it, when you were installing, it felt like you would think visitors would find this really challenging, because it's challenging and a tough part of Chinese Canadian history. But actually, when visitors come here of all different generations, they immediately get it and they immediately gravitate towards it. So that's something that's really interesting that I think often art does, where you have some preconception of the way people will react, but then it's completely different. So I find that really kind of compelling about this work as well. Um, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about uh, kind of like the rocks, what you decided to use, and even the stands that are on? Like, are they a particular style?
For the stands, I looked at designs in a lot of Chinese traditional penjing pot stands that are normally like a rosewood. But so I didn't want to go as ornate and traditional. So this is a more of a kind of minimal, modernized kind of version of them, still considering certain proportions in terms of like the beveled edges and whatnot. But definitely as a work, I also had to consider it in engineering kind of safe way, because these pots are quite heavy. The
Right.
rocks are quite heavy. So we also had to make sure that the stands themselves are sturdy enough that they can handle the weight. And I also tried to like, there was a lot of engineering in the work because I had to figure out how to make it not too heavy. So actually in the pot, there is, foam as a base. And I use these light lava rocks as to kind of bring up to the level of the earth. And they're also kind of not too heavy. But I did want, I think the palette is very important to me in terms of the work. I wanted it to be quite kind of neutral. So that's why the palette, all the kind of earth I've chosen, the lava rock, and this little pebbles are like aqua soil. So through my kind of recent interest in aquascaping, I'm familiar with certain materials like this aqua soil as well.
And this object that you're holding is like a 3D scanned object, which is in the Chung collection, correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I find, is this your first time, or you worked with 3D objects before?
I've only messed around with 3D models digitally, but I don't really have any worked with 3D printout objects. I did work on a project with 3D ceramic printer from Emily Carr. It was like an experiment. So that was my interest in like converting a 3D model into a ceramic object to put in the kiln and fire and see what the result was. Yeah.
Right. Is there what are your, like, now after the exhibition's been open and we've had some time, now looking at the artwork again, any thoughts that you didn't have before?
I haven't visited the work in a while, and it's very interesting to see it change formally. So what I'm noticing now as I look at this ceramic bone components is like I had rubbed this pigmentation, like just Chinese ink that used for calligraphy, like just very dry brush on it with a wax finish. And I think over time, the ceramic has been drinking, like sucking it in. So that it's like more matte. It seems to become more matte over time. Like it's aging, just like anything in a landscape. It feels like it's aged more. Like when I installed it, I think it was like glistening and it had a bit of like a semi-gloss on it, and now it's just kind of like aged and has gotten like kind of more matte.
Well, the exhibition's open for a year, so as the year progresses, we'll be able to see how it the landscape has naturally changed
Yeah.
throughout the course of the exhibition.
Yeah, I at one point remember was suggesting maybe planting things into it,
Right.
but then I didn't want to people to have to manipulate the puzzle too much in case it crumbles or it's falls apart. So I guess I didn't talk about the cues.
Oh yes, because that's real hair.
That's real horse hair. That we ordered. But what I wanted to do was through some of the other material I kind of stumbled on in the Chung collection were these problematic racist illustrations of Chinese laborers from the late 19th century. So that's like through this magazine called, I think, The Wasp, that came out of California. So there's all these illustrations, and a lot of times I'm thinking, because my primary part of my practice is drawing and in a way in an illustrative manner. So I think I wanted to respond and like take back some of these like kind of racist kind of tropes that were used in those illustrations, oftentimes depicting Chinese laborers with the cues as like associating with like a rat tail or vermin or other. It was used as a kind of character tool to other Chinese immigrants. But then there's also the history of the cue, because it's also like an imposed hairstyle by the Manchu dynasty. So it's kind of a poignant symbol of oppression in a way that functioned on both sides of the Pacific.
Let's talk a little bit about your personal history. I know that you were born in Hong Kong, but you moved somewhere else quite young.
Yeah, it was actually my family had been already living in Lagos, Nigeria, prior to me being born, about 5 years. But my mom went back to Hong Kong for the healthcare system. So I was born there in Hong Kong in the late 70s. Spent a little bit of time to firm up, and then rejoined the family in Lagos. So between the years of 78 and 84, our family lived kind of between Lagos and Hong Kong. And then, yeah, in 84, our family immigrated to Canada, to a small northwestern Ontario town.
And why did they do that? Like, why Thunder Bay, Ontario, and why Canada?
It's a good question, and I try to figure it out because I'm the youngest, so sometimes you don't get all the information. But from my understanding, 1984, I think that's when the Sino-British Declaration was signed. So I think the impending handover of Hong Kong back to China was one kind of, I guess, development that kind of encouraged my parents to consider moving away from Hong Kong. I also heard that maybe life was too intense, maybe like a lot of pressure. It's like so maybe they're looking for a chill place to be, and maybe school was. I know I came home from Chinese school crying one summer because I was maybe too acclimatized to Western teaching styles, and I did like Chinese school in the summer in Hong Kong, and the teachers are pretty hardcore. So
they still are pretty hardcore.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I was too soft maybe for Hong Kong, and so I think that's one of the reasons. And then in terms of a chill place, they moved to Thunder Bay, but I think that's through certain immigration kind of guidelines or parameters in Canada at the time, where in order to immigrate here, our family needed to contribute to the economy. So my dad had a friend who wanted to partner with him, and they opened up this video cassette manufacturing company in Thunder Bay, of all
Remember
places.
video cassettes? So it was a kind of local blockbuster?
No, it's like it's more of like a lab. It's a lab. It's actually pretty technical because you're dealing with film, right?
Right.
So I think at certain points they were producing, they're working with 3M and stuff like that. But it's strange that that plant existed, I guess, in Thunder Bay in a way. So I think that's why we were there.
And then, so basically this experience of living in Lagos and then Hong Kong, like really kind of hot weather, crowded population to the kind of very stark winter landscape, small population village of Thunder Bay, like that contrast. How did that feel?
I think because I was around 6, 7, the way I internalized that contrast was maybe I didn't hold on to the city and the urbanscape and the density and the stimulus as much. I was just like, okay, this is like a new chapter. But I think for my parents and my older sister, because they were more familiar with those contexts, I think it was more stark for them, and they had a tougher time adjusting. When you're younger, you're a little bit more malleable, right? But I think definitely for my parents, it's difficult because I think you're used to a certain amount of stimuli or community, or, there's more family in those places. So there's more like social activity. I think over time, our family kind of became more and more like isolated and didn't have, now I think as an adult, like the healthy times you do socializing.
Right.
That's really, important for work-life balance. So I think over time they kind of were in their own, our own little bubble, right?
And I think that is the case for so many new immigrants. And when I think about the Chinese laborers that came over on the railroad, it must have felt like that for them, that this kind of lack of community, or they had to kind of create their own community in this very kind of foreign landscape, which is very much kind of the work that we have here in front of you, that you've made for the exhibition.
Yeah, I think in a way, maybe my mom's a social person, and we started, aside from my dad having the video cassette company, manufacturing company, my mom was bored and she started a Chinese Canadian restaurant. And in a way, I think it's extremely hard work, but it was also an opportunity for her to have like socialize with coworkers, socialize with customers. And that was just in this kind of, these Chinese Canadian restaurants are quite known, especially in small towns in Canada, as a social hub, like a community hub. So I think maybe there's some feeling for her in that way that she could create something where she could socialize and feel community.
So in a way, because there was no community when your family moved here, your mom, in a way, created her own community through this entrepreneurial, creating a restaurant. And the menu from that restaurant is actually in our first exhibition, Odysseys in Migration. And so I know you called it a Chinese Canadian restaurant. Like, what is a Chinese Canadian restaurant?
Well, it was essentially when I was growing up in Thunder Bay, a Chinese Canadian restaurant is a Chinese restaurant.
Right.
Because there was, there was no delineation. But I guess now I would consider certain menu items that it's actually hard to find now. Like egg roll, chicken ball, chop suey. In Thunder Bay, there's a particular dish called bonbon spare ribs. So all this kind of fabricated, kind of fictional Chinese food for local customers. But it was weird. I think about it now, and I also see this relationship with the Tans in Hong Kong, where the diners, also this fabrication of Western food, or some hybrid or some take on Western food. So it is an interesting tradition between the Tan diners in Hong Kong's kind of invention of Western cuisine or hybridization of Western cuisine to Chinese Canadian cuisine here, which is also kind of like a fabrication. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Howie, for coming here and telling us about your work and your history of being Canadian.
Cool. Thank you.
This podcast was recorded on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We invite you all to reflect on the territories that you're on and the host nations, and pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging. This Schoolroom Special Series, featuring the artists in Reshaping Collections, was made possible with funding from the City of Vancouver and the Province of British Columbia. To learn more about the Chinese Canadian Museum and book tickets, visit us at www.chinesecanadianmuseum.ca and follow us on Instagram at ccmuseumbc for updates. The Schoolroom is presented by the Chinese Canadian Museum, hosted by Dr. Melissa Carmen Lee and produced by Rosalie Gunawan. Production of this video podcast special series is supported by Adrian Ma and Haley Sang-Savan. Videography is by Wakefield Agency and Elwin Xie. The theme music and original audio was created by Joshua Young, and graphic design is by Studio Pian Pian He and Max Harvey. Stay tuned for the next episode of The Schoolroom, available wherever you get your podcasts.